This is going to be a video alert for those of you who own these old classic Mercedes-Benz of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, particularly if you don't drive them very much. And so is the case with a lot of these cars. They get driven in good weather, they get driven in the summer, and then they get stored during the winter months. So is the case with this 280 SE. We pulled it out of storage here a couple weeks ago, and I could tell driving it out that every time I hit the brake, the car would kind of drag a little bit. And I thought, uh-oh, we have brake problems. And sure enough, we brought it in here on the lift and started checking the brake calipers. And every one of them was sticking. In fact, there were two of them that were actually locking up, and you couldn't even turn the wheel after having applied brake pressure. So we had to pull everything apart, take the calipers apart, rebuild them, clean them, because there are no new parts. There are no rebuilt calipers available for many of these cars, and we're finding out right now that a number of the rebuild kits, the seals and rubber parts to rebuild these calipers, are becoming very rare, and some of them are already extinct. So this is the other part of the alert. Not only to take care of your brakes, but maybe to pick up some spare parts right now while they're available, because a lot of parts for these old classics are kind of, disappearing. Now what I want to do is show you how I test for dragging brakes. This is not a video on how to rebuild your brakes. There's plenty of those out there. This is an alert. This is a warning. Hopefully you will heed this warning so that this won't happen to your old Benz. I would normally have somebody here in the car helping me do this, but I'm going to spin this tire and run and hit the brake real quick to demonstrate to you what I'm trying to explain. We'll get her spinning real good. Now, if you hit the brake while the tire is spinning, or you have somebody else do that for you, you should be able to come back immediately and just spin the tire. Even after hitting the brake really hard, you should be able to easily spin the tire. Now in the back, you're going to have a little dragging from the emergency brake. If it doesn't do that, and this is what happened on this car, you did that and these wheels literally locked up. You could hardly move them after hitting the brake. But if you've got some drag and it's not spinning, you need to do something about your brake calipers before they overheat and cause some real problems out on the open road. Now, because these are old classic cars, the reason this happens is a little bit different than what happens on cars that get driven a lot. And I'm going to take you over to the bench now and show you why these calipers lock up on these old classic cars that don't get driven very much. I recently pulled this front caliper off an old Benz. I could tell it was dragging because one of the pads was wearing more than the other side, and that's a good sign that you probably have one of the pistons that might be sticking. So you can test this on the bench. Just be careful. You want to keep in mind where this is pointing if you still have the flexible hose attached. And I'm going to use a large channel lock and just see if I can get these pistons to move. If the caliper is healthy, they should move in fairly easily, and they should move out fairly easily. So we can just take this one here and squeeze it a little bit. Watch the end of the hose. Here comes the brake fluid. Okay, that one is probably working okay. Now I'm going to take this one and I'm going to squeeze. Nothing. Now, I know you might say, well, Kent, maybe that's in all the way and you don't have anywhere to push it. And that's true. It's getting real close to bottoming out there. So to test them going the other way, we can use compressed air. Compressed air should move the pistons out fairly easily. If it doesn't, you've got a dragging piston. All right, so I'm going to wipe this up. And if you're going to do this test with compressed air, make sure you put a block of wood a thick block wood. That's an inch, a little over an inch thick in between the two pistons, or you're going to have one fly out on you. All right, let's get the compressed air. And I'm just going to give it a couple of blasts. All right, see that one? Moving in. This one didn't move. Didn't move at all. So, you know, this caliper is going to have to be rebuilt or replaced. And I absolutely know what most of you are thinking. Well, Kent, it's obvious why this happened. It didn't get any brake fluid changes over the years. You know, you should be changing this brake fluid every couple of years on these cars, particularly if they don't get driven very much, but not so fast. That's not the main reason. Of course, it's going to help to change the brake fluid, but that is not the reason why these old calipers are sticking. And I'm going to show you that it's not because they're rusting on the inside of the caliper, they're rusting on the outside. So if they're not rusting on the inside and they're rusting on the outside, you can see that regular brake fluid flushes are not going to prevent this problem here. To prove my point here, I want you to take a close look at this caliper that I pulled off a 280 SL. You can see the groove where the seal rides, and then inside you can see the inside of the caliper where the piston is. But look at this outside ridge, outboard of the seal. That's all rusted up, and that's what's causing the piston to drag. Now let's take a look at the piston. You generally don't have problems with these pistons because they have a special plating on them. And if you just clean them off, watch me clean this piston off. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of pitting up along this top edge here. See how clean the piston is? You get a little bit of pitting up here where that rides outside of the seal. As once again, that's where the majority of the rust occurs. That's not going to be a problem. If you get flaking and pitting down in this area, you're going to have to reject the piston. So it's not the piston rusting that's the problem. It's not down inside there. Let me show you one that's a little cleaner. We started to clean this one up. You can see down inside there, look at how clean that is. Now this outside ridge, we had to start sanding it to polish it back into position. If you don't do this and you try to reinstall these pistons, watch this. See, it doesn't want to go in. They should just slide right in, but it wants to bind up unless it's really straight. They should just slide in and out. And so you can see where the problem is, right there. Outboard of the seal groove, moisture gets in there, a combination of maybe some brake fluid leaking by and moisture causing that to rust and causing this piston to seize up in the bore. So we're going to have to clean these edges up real well before we reassemble these calipers. We're working on a special tool that will allow you to put it in there and turn it easily to clean them. Problem is they have to be different diameters for different calipers, but you know, trying to clean this is a pain too, and it has to be cleaned properly. Now to get these pistons out when they're frozen, we have a hydraulic pump that we use to pump them out. And I'll give you a link to that video in the description below this one to show you how to get these out if they're frozen in, because compressed air will not move them out. And on a lot of these, you will not be able to pump them out with a brake pedal. I don't like trying to get these out with a brake pedal. A lot of times they're so frozen, even 2,000 PSI on our hydraulic pump, it's a strain to get some of these frozen pistons out. All right, you got to see what causes it, how can you prevent it. I believe the best prevention is regularly driving the car at least every 30 days. Take it out on a trip and drive it enough and brake it enough that the brakes get hot. And you need to kind of clean out some of that moisture. And the other thing is, when you're rebuilding them, use this special orange ceramic brake pad grease. You can goop this up on the seal, and after you put the piston in, goop a bunch of this ceramic brake pad grease around the outside before you snap on that rubber seal, and that's going to prolong any rust forming in this area. But I have to warn you, if you start experiencing sticking brakes in your old Benz, don't drive it until you fix it. I hope I was able to explain why this problem happens, what you can do to hopefully prevent it, and then what you will have to do if it should happen to you on your old classic Benz. Now, this 280 SE, every wheel just freely spins after a lot of scrubbing and polishing and and sanding, but we have a car now that we can take out of the road for the rest of this summer, and we know it'll perform well and we won't have to worry about potential brake problems. And don't let what happened to my daughter and I almost 20 years ago when we pulled an old 280 SE back from Tacoma and the whole front end caught on fire. You don't want to know why that happened? Yep, sure enough, the brakes were stuck and everything got so hot in the front end that it caught the grease on fire. So that's the worst case scenario, but I speak from experience. Take care of your brakes on these old Benzes.